Tonight's Active Travel Cafe session is about development, and it feels like a bit of a triptych, the end of a triptych to me, because a few years ago I was listening to Transport for New Homes telling us about how development was of new homes was very poor and they were disconnected and very car dependent. And then a month or two ago I was listening to Create Streets telling us how they could be designed better and how they could be planned to be more dense and more connected for people to walk and cycle and thrive in that way. And now we have Wesley Wroe from Stanek, who's going to talk to us about creating an active new town at Waterbeach Barracks. So this is somebody who's actually been involved in doing it, which is fantastic. So really looking forward to hearing from Wes after our normal news session. So hi to Wes, and really appreciate you here talking to us. So let's start off with our normal news session. Maybe more than maybe less, given we've just had a couple of weeks of holidays. So who would like to kick us off with a bit of active travel news for us all? Normally the hands go up at this point. Yes, Mark from Brighton.
Well, I was actually waiting. I was actually waiting for anyone else.
Yeah, you're normally in there somewhere.
No, just some very not minor news. Actually, we've had two red routes designated in Brighton. They started operation yesterday on two trunk routes, cycling routes with advisory cycle lanes, which have been parked in for Lewis Road, parked in as long as I've lived in Brighton. And I cycled down it today and it was empty, apart from one Iceland truck, which was presumably going to get a camera-based ticket very soon. So hopefully that's the start of, it's that they're just advisory cycle lanes. They're not brilliant, but at least they're not full of parked cars. So a very small gain.
Well, that's good. I view that we've had discussions and questions here about our red routes just a London thing. And I've only seen them kind of on private land, really, around Oxfordshire. So maybe there's precedent value as well.
They are definitely in national legislation in TSRGD. Basically, no waiting, no loading, no doing anything. I think taxis can stop
touch the ground.
Taxis can stop to pick and drop off, and that's about all. No blue badge holders either.
Okay, that's a big difference. Yeah. Right. So. Okay. Great. Tim from Leicester.
Apologies for long-term absence, but I am back. We've got red routes in Leicester. I think we might have been the first out of outside London, and they're on London Road, of course. The information was really this weekend. It's the Safe Streets Now day of action, and just to say in Leicester we've got two kiddical masses and a town hall square protest as well. So all hell's going to break loose. And I've just discovered that the football team will have finished their match just before all of this moves off. So it's going to be quite funny.
Brilliant.
I'll report back next week.
Just tell them all to bring their bicycles. That's terrific. Yeah, I'm glad some of these, I was just going to mention Safe Streets Now if nobody else did, but you have, so that's terrific. In Oxford, we're combining it with our kiddical mass on the 28th of April, which we plan quite a long way in advance. So that's going to be our event, slightly off time, but very much in the same course. That's good. Any others? No, it's been a quiet news few weeks. Okay, well, let's go on to the main event then. As I billed a few weeks ago, Wes Wroe from Stanek, and I've got the company name right, and you can talk to us about Waterbeach Barracks and the development of that. Wes, you should be set up so that you can share slides.
Hi there.
Would you like to
Can you hear me okay?
run from there? Yep, loud and clear.
Excellent. Sorry, of course, I was a few minutes late to the meeting because I started on my computer and then realised that I couldn't figure out how to get into the Zoom call. And then I thought our computer systems were going to stop me getting to the... Anyway, it's all fine. I'm here now. Very good to meet you all. I am Wes. I work for Stantec. I'm a civil engineer by background. Been doing it for a few years now. And over the course, I suppose naturally over the course of my career, primarily working on private residential developments, infrastructure supporting them. I've been doing more and more around active travel, and to start off with, learning the benefits that we can gain from incorporating active travel into residential schemes, and then as time has gone on, kind of proselytizing about it to anyone who'll listen. And trying to change engineers' minds one by one. So today I'm going to talk to you about Waterbeach. I don't know if any of you are from Cambridgeshire or East Anglia or familiar with, have come across Waterbeach Barracks as a scheme. Let me just share my screen, and hopefully can someone just acknowledge vocally that they can see that? Because I can't see anyone's hand.
Yes, that's all
good.
Very visible.
Good. I can't see hands, so I'm happy to take questions as we go through. But someone, I can see people's screens. Yeah, if anyone wants to, tell me if there's a question to take, I'm happy to do that. So do interrupt me. So Waterbeach Barracks. Situated just north of Cambridge, so between Cambridge and Ely, for people that are familiar with the area, identified in the local plan for 11,000 new homes as a new town. So I said before, I work for Stantec, who are kind of multi-purpose engineering planners, do a bit of everything really. We have supported the developer, Urban and Civic, on the design and the delivery of all of the main infrastructure. So Urban and Civic side is 6,500 houses, so just a small lot. Ultimately, when this is built out, it basically triples the size of the existing village of Waterbeach. So it's a significant new piece of residential infrastructure, but there's obviously lots more than just houses going in there. So whole new town, and really the vision from the get-go was about how do we imagine a new town in this setting that is fit for the future, really. And so I've been involved with the project for 5 or 6 years, really from when the outline planning for the site was granted. And have been working on this planning and design since then. So to my mind, one of the things that has made the site unique, and we'll come to some of the details with regards to active travel in a few slides, not too long, but there's been a real focus on wanting to have a site that genuinely does encourage people to walk and cycle, both within the site, the new town itself, but also to connect to the site. So obviously Cambridge is known for being a proudly cycle first city, and so being just 6 miles just outside of Cambridge, so that it was always a desire to allow people to connect well with their bikes, and it's embedded in the transport assessment. So the A10, which this site connects to, so on my screen here, the A10 runs north-south on the western side here. If anyone again travels between Cambridge and Ely at all, you'll know that it's a pretty jam-packed road, not much capacity remaining on it. So from a transport planning perspective, there was always the concern that dropping 10,000 new homes on the side of a road that's already at capacity is always going to be difficult. So what was agreed was essentially what's known in the kind of transport planning world as a monitor and manage strategy, which is essentially that the developer can build the first, in this case, 1,600 homes with the A10 in its existing form. And at the end of that period, having monitored what the impact is on the current traffic, there's then a decision as to what next steps happen to allow the next lot of homes, which means that from the developer's point of view, there's a big incentive to encourage people not to travel to site by car and instead be connecting either using public transport, and there's a train station in Waterbeach not so far away, or by bike or by foot. So straight from the get-go, there's a big incentive from the developer who is enabling this site to make sure that active travel is at the heart of it and is promoted, because basically if they can encourage people not to use their cars, then they can build more houses quicker, which ultimately is the goal for a housing developer. One of the things that worked really well at Waterbeach was having a house builder, housing developer, Urban and Civic, who were genuinely believed in delivering a sustainable new town and everything that comes with that. So it's not just about the active travel, but a much broader piece than that, around both the landscaping, the ecology on the site, opportunities for play, the new schools and other facilities that are on the site. Having ourselves their kind of technical support to create the infrastructure that would meet their kind of goals. Having the local authority being a bit more understanding and willing to take not necessarily risks. To some people, but actually highways authorities, if anyone is familiar with working with them, are pretty averse to doing anything different to what they've done for the last 30 years. So actually trying to come up with new designs that moved away from being car focused and towards being friendly to people walking and cycling is a bit novel to some highways authorities. And actually, in this case, we were lucky that Cambridgeshire Highways were quite willing to make some changes to their done way of doing things. Added to those two, we then have a very engaged kind of grassroots cycling and walking campaigns around Cambridge. Roxanne leading Cam Cycle, who you'll all know very well, and Cam Cycle have played a pivotal role in the kind of the overall direction of travel of the infrastructure that serves Waterbeach, over the last 15 years, from inception. And so we've had the pleasure of having regular contact with Cam Cycle in a very friendly, professional manner, who have helped, challenge some of the designs, help improve some of the designs, and ultimately help us then, get the Highways Authority on board with doing things a bit differently, which has been a really great process. So a couple of things I'll kind of zoom into. Again, apologies if any of this ends up being a bit too technical or not technical enough for you. Do ask any questions you like. So we're looking here at the first phase of development. So this is the master plan for the first 900 homes or so. Again, just from a planning perspective, we were responsible. The way that Urban and Civic designed their sites is we were designing the main infrastructure. So in this case, it's the grid of the kind of the main road network, and then some of the cycle paths and all the drainage and things that tie them together. The housing parcels themselves, again for scale, each of these is say 100 or so homes that come forward. So we design and get planning for the overall infrastructure that serves everything, and then separate house builders and their designers come on board and design the individual housing parcels. So they're kind of outside of our control. But that seems to be the way in which you build a new town of this sort of size. So this is one of the examples of how the kind of this slightly iterative process between the different parties came together nicely. So in an earlier sort of planning design, what you can see here are kind of a typical grid. We've got the primary road running across the top, linking in the north. We've got the Cambridge Research Park, which is a big employment hub in Cambridge. Heading off to the east down this road here, you get to the Waterbeach train station, which connects you down to Cambridge and London. And so that's the kind of primary movement route east to west. And then we've got this typical grid of kind of secondary and tertiary roads through the site, linking you to the school and to the other housing parcels. One of the things that was raised, actually, it turns out by Cam Cycle during the one of the planning consultations, was that right here outside the front of the school, you've got this potential for quite a big conflict between different users, particularly at school drop off and pick up. So if you can imagine in the morning rush to drop, you've got the front of the school here, you've got this diagonal, which is one of our primary active travel routes with segregated cycle facilities taking you up to the research park and taking you down to the train station. And you've got obviously cars coming to drop kids off at school. And so there you have the potential risk of a lot of conflict of different user groups. So the question was posed to us is, what can we do to basically segregate those users? And as we kind of took a step back and thought, yeah, fair point, what can we do here? Well, can we introduce some sort of filtered permeability outside this school so that cars can't go all the way through here, but we have priority at this crossing for pedestrians and cyclists? And so, yeah, we could do that. And as we started saying, well, do we do that at this node, or okay, what about this node here? You don't actually need cars anywhere along the front of the school. And then we took a step back. Well, you don't need cars along this bit here. And if cars aren't here, then they don't need to be here. And as we started, it was like unpeeling an onion. We suddenly realized there was about 500 meters worth of carriageway that we had designed that we actually didn't need. And so we could sort of peel back these layers and say, right, well, instead of just introducing a planter that stops cars driving one way or another, we can just remove all these roads, replace them with foot, pedestrian and cycle paths and landscaping and play facilities. And actually what you get then is a primary school that faces straight out onto some big open suds features and some woodlands, with no car interaction at the front. And you've got housing parcels which still have enough points of access for what they're serving, but they're not accessed from every direction by car. And so again, this took a bit of there was a bit of negotiation, a bit of discussion here. First of all, Urban and Civic were concerned that if we were limiting the access, the vehicular access to the sites, would this make the parcels less attractive to potential house builders? They went away and had their conversations. Turns out not. Actually, people were quite happy with it. And the idea of actually having a load of these houses which fronted directly onto really nice high quality landscape was quite attractive and actually had added value to the house builders. Similarly, from a kind of a fire and access point of view, you need to make sure that all those points were retained. From a refuse collection point of view, all those things worked. Finally, from the school access, there was discussions with the local schools team as to what do you need in terms of access? How much parking do you need for parents in the morning? And they basically said, we don't want any, because whatever you do outside the front of a primary school, it will be chaos. If you provide 50 parking spaces, they'll all be filled and more. If you provide none, it will all be filled and more. So we'd rather you didn't provide any. So that was actually quite encouraging and not really the answer we'd expected. So again, just because the question might come up, there is a point of vehicular access in this southern end of the school for servicing, for staff parking, and as a point of disabled access if required. But the frontage of the school is only served by foot and by bike. One of the ways that this was kind of softened as a message is that just at its northern end, and I'll show you on some of the images because a lot of this has been built now. We've got our sustainable travel hub, which is a mobility hub, which is situated just up here. And the idea is one of the park and ride bus services in Cambridge is it being extended, and it's coming up to this point here. So again, from this point, you can come off the A10 and join a park and ride bus, or you can, from here you can take an e-bike and get yourself to the train station, etc. But it's also a location that, as a parent, if you were going to drop kids off at school, you could park here and then walk through the nice routes that we've provided and get to the school to kind of have that convenience. So for us as designers, this was a really good process to go through, having been challenged on one thing to suddenly start saying, oh, actually, this unpicks a whole load of things and assumptions of how we normally do things. And really comes back to this point of, can we design to make sure that if you're walking and cycling, you can get anywhere you want, anytime you want, as easy as you can. And if you're in a car, you can get everywhere you need to, but it doesn't have to be the easiest way of getting around. It's okay if you have to take a little bit longer way getting where you get to. This was again a slightly crudely drawn diagram showing that radical transformation. And what what you're seeing here is essentially these legs that previously had vehicular access are now just nice cycleways. The other area, again, because we're all people that are interested in active travel, we can talk some more details. So this was just a good example of how the design process kind of evolved as we went through. So when we originally, again, submitted the reserve matters for the first phase, so the detailed planning submission, this was the design went forward. So you can see we've already got the kind of Copenhagen style crossing with the priority to pedestrians and cycles crossing the primary street. With the primary street crossing, this is a secondary street here. But then what we were looking at here is the access into the housing parcels. So again, as engineers, we thought we'd done quite a good job. We've got a nice raised table here. We've got reasonably small radiuses. We've got it level crossing for pedestrians and cycles. And the challenge, again, from Cam Cycle came back to say, this is fine and it's better than some, but actually, could we tighten this further? Could we do something with materials? Could we make this completely continuous through here? And actually, CamCycle suggested at the time a product called the Marshall's Dutch entrance curb. I don't know how many super bods there are out there, but it's fairly new to the UK market. And at the time when we were going through planning, it hadn't actually landed in the UK market. So Marshall's had just come up with this. CamCycle, obviously, knowing all the good stuff on the ground before everyone else, suggested it to us. And we had a conversation with Marshall's, and I think Waterbeach was probably the first certainly the first new development to then take this product on and use it across the board. So we looked at this, we introduced this, we got rid of the radiuses altogether. And again, there's a bit of work to make this work, because you have to remember these are adopted highways by Cambridge County Council. You can do what you want on private streets basically, but when you get into adopted highway, there's a lot of rigor and checks that go into this. And so particularly thinking about refuse vehicles, which are, as engineers, are the bane of our lives, because they are enormous, and in Cambridgeshire in particular, they're very enormous. So we have to make sure that a refuse vehicle can easily get in and out. We obviously need to make sure it's safe and the visibility is good for everyone. But actually, having gone through, again, a couple of iterations, we kind of workshopped this out with Cambridgeshire, and we came up with a solution that they were like, actually, yeah, that kind of works for us. We don't see any reason why we wouldn't do that. So actually, we came from this, which we thought was quite good design, and we were challenged on, and then we got to this, which actually is, I think, a pretty radical in terms of new residential development. For the particularly sharp of eye of you, you'll have noticed a lack of tactile paving, which is again an area of, I think, evolving interest and evolving knowledge as to where it is and isn't appropriate to use tactile paving at crossings, particularly when we're looking to have kind of continuous. These are shared footway cycle tracks out of interest, so we will have bikes on the paths as well. And again, it was felt in the context, because it's, we've created a very low speed environment with these Dutch entrance curbs. Cars almost have to come to a stop to take that turn and get in there. The feeling was that actually the design itself is going to be slowing cars to such a point that we really can provide absolute priority to pedestrians and cyclists to allow them to cross there comfortably, almost without having to give a second thought to the fact that cars might be coming. Now, the proof will be in the pudding. Obviously, these housing parcels are just opening up now. We're getting residents slowly moving in, but this is very early days. We'll probably have, in 5 or 6 years, we'll have a good idea of, I suppose, what it feels like to use these streets, and hopefully it will feel positive, and hopefully people will feel like this sort of infrastructure gives them, as people walking and cycling, more ownership over the streets they're on. So here you go, a few nice aerial shots of this in progress. So what we were just looking at there was this little snapshot here, and again, you can kind of see on the ground. One of the really nice things about this as a design feature is that actually, as a driver in your car, you almost can't see the junction until the last minute. And so again, it's all about having that really, you really have to be going very slowly and thinking about what you're doing, because it hides what's going on. And yeah, so that's something. Again, this is just coming to, I suppose, lessons for us. And you've got to take the good and the bad. As an engineer, this sort of design is a bit different. It's a bit unusual. People aren't quite used to seeing this yet. So this, and apologies if the picture doesn't make much sense to you. You just have to bear with me, and I'll try and describe it. This is obviously standing at road level in the middle of the carriageway, looking into that housing parcel. This is our Marshall's Dutch entrance curb, and coming into the street in the parcel here. One of the things that we discovered, and I'll just disclaimer, so I don't know who the designer of the stuff this side. My design finished at this line here. This is not about pointing fingers. This is about learning lessons. But obviously there was a misinterpretation of the design when whoever was designing on this side into the parcel took this on, and so you can see that the footpath raises up again. So we've got to a position where we've got a level footway cycle track, and the theory is, our theory was that basically as a pedestrian, you never have to change your level on this site. So as you're maneuvering around the site, you're always at the same level. Cars go up and down, but you have priority going through. Unfortunately, that wasn't quite understood by the people that then took on what's going on here, and you're ramping up again. So the cars are staying level here, and then interestingly, there's another raised table going into the site, and there's lifted it up again. So, you know, if there's any engineers in the room, you might find this interesting. If you're not an engineer and you're not into curbs, then you might just be looking at this thinking, what on earth is this guy talking about? Let's move on. So sorry if that's you. But for me, this is a good lesson in actually, as we start to do things differently, we've got to be really careful on the detail, because actually it's not necessarily always obvious to everyone who's not in the room how the next stage follows on. And so, you know, this has been built up, it'll be fine, you know, it'll still be okay. It's just, this is always going to really annoy me that as a pedestrian you've got a little ramp coming up here onto the footpath when you shouldn't really have done. It doesn't really change road safety, it doesn't really change anything else, but it's a, you know, it's a detail. Here we then go, a nice lovely drone shot of the site, because everyone loves a good drone shot, and I have to say I think it's looking quite lovely, but I am very biased. This is the mobility hub, so our sustainable travel hub just down here, already in use. The first parcel is being built out by Stonebond Homes. Second parcel over here is Carla Homes. And I think to date there's 15 residents or so who've moved into site. The site opened up at the end of last year. What you'll see here, this big flat area, this is the school parcel to come. And you know, this whole path down here, this is a 4 meter wide shared footway cycle track, and another one running through diagonal through here. So again, this is that view of basically from everywhere from this area is all fully pedestrianised essentially, and there's no cars beyond those points. Again, just gives you a bit of a context of actually how lovely the site is. Big lake in the middle of it. This was previously a site run by the Royal Engineers, and they used to do various boating exercises out there apparently, but lots of really good kind of mature landscape features here as well. And there's a new a new walking and cycling track in fact, that's opened up to do a loop of the lake, which is now open to the public. So if anyone is in the area or you know, passing along the A10, you can pop by and have a stop and have a nice wander around the lake, do a loop there. Yeah. And yeah, finally, I guess my little scribble on top with another little area of view, just to give a feel of what I think what we've managed to achieve in this first phase. So red here is our, you know, kind of vehicular car infrastructure, and in blue is the pedestrian and cycle infrastructure. And I think my takeaway, you know, from this as an engineer is actually, this is a site that, this is not a radical developer. This is not anything particularly radical. These could be all very regular homes that get sold. It could be any old developer that comes along, but actually through little tweaks in thinking about how the infrastructure comes together, we've managed to achieve a site which has a far higher proportion of routes for walking and cycling than for driving. And what actually wasn't that difficult. So I think, yeah, for me, it's a good example, you know, for thinking about how you know, other sites can come forward, and you know, something that I try to learn from on other sites we're working on. So I have noticed a bunch of messages in the chat, and this is my last slide. So
Don't worry, Res. Robin will help.
Oh, cool.
Get through
Yeah,
those at the end. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I think, was that me? Yeah, that was me. That's me. So thank you for your time. I hope that was a little bit interesting. And I'm happy to take questions and have a discussion about some of our thinking and some of what we've done.
Thank you, Wes. That was really great, really interesting. And I'm not sure. I was tempted to run a poll on how many people knew the term Dutch entry curb before they were here, and I don't know. I reckon we'd be up at 80% or so. We're definitely a bunch of curb nerds here. And I think you expect quite a few people were wincing when you put that picture up of the pavement rising there. I thought that was really interesting and very much on topic for this group, and a really good example that I can't wait to show to some of our councillors here in Oxfordshire. Of course, Roxanne and I have a bit of a a bit of friendly competition between Oxford and Cambridge, of course. I've got one question before I delve into the ones that were in the chat, which is, do you know what the density is in homes per acre or per hectare?
Yeah, you're testing me now. It's been a while.
Yeah.
I don't know what these plots were, but I think they ranged from 30 to 80.
Yeah.
So I think in the plots we're looking in the middle were typically 50 or 60 plots per acre. Hectare.
Yeah, so very much in the zone of, I mean, the Create Streets stepping off the road to nowhere was talking about 55,
Sure.
describing it as gentle density. So it's exactly in that kind of zone.
Yeah, and essentially, as you approach the lake over here, the density increases, and the vision is that there's going to be, a bunch of apartment blocks and kind of penthouse suites overlooking the lake, and lots of nice things on top of the Tesco Express or whatever it is that sits below. But yeah, so in these areas, I think very much in that ballpark.
Okay, that's good. So, so there's one question. There's a couple of linked question here, which is about barriers. So, one thing we'd love to hate is anti-mobility, anti-cycling. Sometimes they're called anti-moped barriers, but they get in the way of inclusive active travel. Are there any of those? Is there a way of stopping them appearing? Was that approached?
Yeah, so I think so we use bollards. There's a few bollards on site, but they are solely for the purpose of preventing cars from accessing areas we wouldn't want them. So there's, if you're on a moped or a quad bike, I suppose you could drive your heart out wherever you want here. But no, there are no kind of cyclist dismount barriers or anything like that around. Quite purposefully. So, where we have particularly the kind of the 4 meter wide shared paths, and when this site obviously came forward, this is pre LTN 120, and even if it wasn't, we may have done some things differently, may not have done. We have probably a larger proportion of shared paths through parts of the site than you might do if you were wanting to have a kind of a gold plated design now. But again, I think in the context, this is a very much a sort of a semi urban rural stranding the gap there. It's fairly appropriate, I think. And yeah, we have a number of these kind of larger 4 meter wide shared paths, and so the bollards are there purely to stop cars driving, and a number of locations they're sort of demountable if we need to have emergency service access.
Right. Yes, and indeed, one of the questions was about shared use paths and whether that would pass muster with Active Travel England today.
Yeah. So I mean, again.
So yeah, you've addressed.
Well, I think I would be interested. I suppose I'd be interested to know that question. I think I would argue the case for them. So on our primary road, we've got segregated cycle facilities, as you can see. Am I still showing the screen? Yeah. As you can see down here. So again, you have to remember this is the first part of the first phase of the whole site. So this is the first. In fact, this is probably the 900 homes worth of development of the full 6,500 on our side. So it happens that we've only got one road through here which has these segregated cycle lanes on them. We have quite a few of these more kind of off carriageway shared paths which are 4 meters plus, and potentially some of those now we would think about doing potentially light segregation and having 2 and 2. But again, I think there's there could be some discussion around that. But particularly this diagonal through the middle of the site, which is potentially going to form quite a key commuter route. We might want to see that segregated, or might have chosen to do that. But it felt appropriate at the time, and I think it probably still does, having that shared.
Yeah, and yeah, I know you mean the standards change, and I think they've changed for a good reason. But I mean, I know housing estates built with 3 meter ones, 2.5 meter ones that work, but I don't deny that the new standards are better. So that sounds reasonable to me. What was the? Yeah, this is a really good question from Claire, which is this is essentially why did it happen this way? How come this one has turned out so well with active travel incorporated in the way it has been? Is it leadership? Is it funding? Is it an individual?
There's a combination of things, I think, as any time when you have good outcomes. So obviously the setting helps. So the fact that we're in Cambridgeshire, there was always from the outset, more of a desire to be able to promote travel by active modes. I think Urban and Civic as a developer, as a client, have been quite forward thinking, and they've been willing to imagine a future that isn't necessarily completely dominated by cars, but also they can see the value as a master developer, almost acting like a local authority in themselves in what they're kind of bringing forward. That actually, if they can deliver high quality infrastructure, that will ultimately lead to higher value houses, and that's the kind of maths that they work on. And so that's kind of part of it. Like I said, there's the transport planning angle as well, kind of embedded through the monitor and manage approach, that actually by reducing, by creating a mode shift, getting people out of their cars, they reduce their impact on the A10 and potentially enable quicker development to progress before something happens to the A10. So again, anyone in the know locally, there's been ongoing talk about the A10, whether it gets dualed, what happens to the A10 in the future to try and increase capacity, and that is an open question. Urban and Civic were quite keen not to be completely beholden on what happens to the A10 to be able to progress their development, which would have been potentially a significant risk to the project, in 5 or 6 years' time. So yeah, I think it was a combination of factors, and like I said as well, having the highway authority who are willing to do things a bit differently. So like the design around that Dutch entrance curb access, I've approached a number of other authorities who've just chucked it straight out, who weren't even willing to have the conversation to introduce something like that. And it's just, no, we just need 6 meter radius, tactiles, drop curbs, and that's what we're doing. Again, those sorts of conversations are starting to change now that Active Travel England are on board and statutory consultee, and that highways officers are starting to kind of change their way of thinking as well. But these things do take time, and ultimately they are risk averse. Naturally, the most important thing is to ensure road safety. But as we all know, I think that road safety is better ensured by controlling what cars are doing than by worrying so much about what people are doing walking and cycling or wheeling.
So is there any advice you could give to campaigners, or for campaigners to give to local authorities or to developers to achieve more of these in the future?
That's a good question.
It's Roxanne's question, basically.
Thank you, Roxanne, not to put me on the spot there. Yeah, so I think, to me, the thing that I often think about in terms of putting this question to developers is actually showing them the example. So a number of other clients we've spoken to basically said, look what we've done at Waterbeach, and like, wow, that looks amazing. That must have been really expensive. I'm like, well, okay, talk to Urban Civic about how expensive it was. That's not my, that's not so much what I'm worried about. But it is a good result, isn't it? And actually, when people can see the kind of the way the infrastructure comes together, the opportunities that created in terms of linking the play spaces, and integration with the SUDs and everything, actually, I think it makes it easier for people to envisage a slightly different way of doing things. And it is helpful to be able to see examples of things, in real life, to kind of believe that things can be different. And again, I think probably in terms of with local authorities, it would be, again, using the thing of, well, look what some other authorities have done. Actually, this can be achieved, and it doesn't result in additional safety concerns. I think being armed with data is always helpful, and again, one of the things that I think we may be lacking a bit in this sphere, and I know is building, is that evidence base around road safety. It was even interesting. I was in a session with some of the team from Waltham Forest talking about a lot of this. They've obviously had a lot of this stuff in longer than anyone else, and even they were saying they've been really bad at doing monitoring and data gathering. And so they have, a lot of what they know is anecdotal rather than kind of really good quantified stuff. So, as I think whatever data and examples we can gather will only help, help the case going forward.
Yeah. So what that suggests to me is we should do, or someone should do two things. One is compare this to on road casualties to other 11,000 person settlements, and then the other is to look at what the property prices are and see if people are paying more for the same thing because it's so nice, basically, because that's what developers are ultimately interested in. I think it probably uses less land as well because of the density, so that's obviously an advantage. The a couple of rubbish questions now, if you see what I mean. You talked about how some of the houses essentially don't have roads next to them. So how is the refuse handled?
Yeah.
How close do refuse vehicles get, or do they use some of the collection systems like you see on the continent with silos and things, or wheelie bins, or how does that work?
No, good question. So all of the houses have direct vehicular access to them. So it's a fair point, because some of them, for example, when you're looking at this photo, these houses along the back here, they don't have vehicular access on both sides. And again, I think one of the mistakes we make sometimes as designers is assuming that an architectural layout, the grid has to mean that cars can go everywhere on the grid, and it doesn't. So for example, all these houses are facing in such a way that a refuse vehicle comes onto the plot, they can do a loop around inside, and in doing so can basically access within a few meters of every house to get out. So it's actually pretty fairly standard urban design principles inside. It's interesting you mentioned about the continental refuse collection, because we did look at the URS system I think you're referring to, so that's underground refuse system. So in Cambridge, we've got one of the examples of that being used in the country. So at the University of Cambridge's Eddington site, they do have a URS system, and I think there's pros and cons to it. We explored it at Waterbeach, but basically because of the density, it wasn't viable. So it works well in high dense urban environments, but basically because in this kind of sort of semi-dense environment, you'd need so many underground refuse points to make sure that people were within. You've got quite strict rules on how far people can walk to their bins in current planning terms, which is not too far basically. And aside from the rules, there's also the question of if people actually want to. So are you going to buy a house if you have to walk 50 meters down the road to drop your bin off? Maybe, but actually that might take a bit of a shift in mentality in terms of what you're signing up to when you're buying the house. Again, I think if you're buying the house and you have to walk 50 meters to your bin, but what you get in return is extra space out the front of your house in terms of beautiful parks and things, instead of loads of cars parked everywhere, it's a different question. And so I think sometimes, again, this comes down to comms. We're often not very good at telling people what they get in exchange for not having cars everywhere, and it always is this conversation of, oh, we're taking away car access for whatever high-flung idea, instead of thinking about, well, car access means half of your site is road or parking space, and is that the best use of land when land is really expensive and really hard to come by, and all that. So I think some of it is about a shift in mentality, some of it's just about shift in messaging and how we what people want when they buy a new home, I suppose.
Yes, and so while people buying here will be opting in to what's there. And what's the if people do have a car?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple of questions linked to that. One is about facilities. So, what facilities are on site? How much is within a 15-minute neighbourhood? Mm-hmm. And then, where do people park? Both by design, where they're meant to park, and where do they actually park? I've managed to string together 3 questions that people have asked in one sentence.
I mean, again, that all is perfectly logical and is. We need to get right, because again, one of the problems is if you don't provide enough parking for people who want to park, then people park in places that you don't want them to park, and instead of creating something nice, you create something horrible. So it's a really important thing to get right. Cambridgeshire relaxed their parking standards a little for Waterbeach because of how much we were promoting the kind of the active travel and the public transport connections, but it's still between 1 and 2 parking spaces per home. So every house has their own parking spaces at their front door, as you would expect if you're buying a new house. The visitor parking is still, I think, I can't remember exactly, 0.25 spaces per house or something like that. So one space for every 4 homes. These are predominantly provided on plot. So the infrastructure that I've been looking at, there's actually not much on-street parking we're providing. So you can't park on the primary road. On the secondary road, you can essentially park. There will be some marked bays along there, but actually they're only going to be brought on as needed. So in the first instance, there aren't going to be any bays marked. And I think the feeling is, it's a bit of a monitor and manage. Let's see how people get on. If it's complete carnage and hundreds of people are parking down the road so you can't move, then maybe we'll start marking them and putting some controls in. But in the first instance, state secret, there is no parking control in South Cambridgeshire. I don't know if we're allowed to say that out loud, but essentially, there's no one wants to put in enforcement that someone has to then monitor. So it's much better if it could be sort of self-enforced. So yeah, that's the answer. There is, if you've got a car, you can park outside your house on your drive as you'd expect. If someone comes to visit you, they can park on the street outside the house as you'd expect. But the hope is that through the design, people will have fewer cars than they would have done otherwise.
And on-site facilities?
Oh yeah, so again,
are shops and GP surgery and that kind of thing?
This is the difficult thing with building a whole new town from scratch, is that it takes time. Obviously, in the proposal for the 6,500 homes, that there's a whole new town centre with everything you'd expect in the town centre. In this first phase, which is, again, I said 900 to 1,000 houses, you can actually see here this kind of white block in the distance is like a mini plaza, and surrounding that are going to be shops and things. Again, they come forward in one of the next phases. And then along the waterfront here, there's a hotel and will be a load of bars and cafes and stuff like that. Lovely things on the waterfront. And I think they're even going to create a new artificial beach to really kind of big up the Waterbeach thing. That's definitely what I saw in an early plan, but Urban and Civic, if you're watching, apologies if I've now committed you to building a beach. In the short term, this little hub here, there's a coffee van that I think is due to be sort of sat here for periods. And things like that. So, obviously, as they're building the houses, there's a kind of cost balance to when you start introducing things like shops, because there needs to be a critical number of people to make it work. But ultimately, over the next couple of years, those things will start trickling in the first phase as well. New doctor's surgery. You've got the primary school here as well. There's a new secondary school, more primary schools, an SEN school. So everything you would expect from a new town, that's all been thought out and will be kind of trickling through. But obviously, for the first few years as it's being built out, it's a bit more scant, which also does mean that people are going to have to probably get in their car to travel to the shops potentially at this stage. But as things, or not, they could cycle down to the train station. And Waterbeach Village isn't too far away. So, I mean, that's the other point. The connection here to the existing village can be accessed through the site this way. On your bike or on foot, but not by car. So if you're in a car, to get to Waterbeach Newtown, you have to go out of the village, up the A10 and back in. If you're on foot or by bike, you can cycle directly through the barracks and the kind of the mess of building works and earthworks around you to get into the existing village where they have their other shops. And that's probably about a 10 to 15 minute cycle to the train station.
Okay. A bit more actually on the cycle infrastructure. So there's one question about the cycle parking in the houses, and another about the quality of the cycle tracks, whether they're machine laid and smooth or hand laid and a little bit lumpy.
Yeah, so cycle parking, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it all conforms with Cambridge's current standards, which Roxanne can probably quote to you. But plenty of cycle parking within the confines of your own home, and then additional kind of public parking spaces at key nodes. Absolutely, the paths are all machine laid. Again, as we got nerds in the room, I can tell you a nerdy story. So these paths that run alongside the primary road, again, bit of a lesson here. So we've got a 2-meter footpath a 50 mil lip and then 2.1 meter unidirectional cycle path before the swales and then the carriageway. Now, our designs were set out like this. We also had a 3D model primarily to the earthworks, and the person who put the 3D model together hadn't included the 50 mil lip in the middle, so it was just a 1 in 40 gradient from inside to outside, which again in theory was fine for the purpose of the modeling because the drawings showed everything you needed. What we didn't realize is the contractor was setting out the curbs front and back first using the model, so essentially they'd lost a 50 mil drop in gradient in the middle. And then, of course, they started on the outside, dropped it at 1 in 40, dropped down by 50, and then the cycle path was flat and there was no fall on it. So last winter, after they'd finished laying all these beautiful cycle paths, we got to site and the paths were basically just rivers because the water was just sat on them or go backwards. So then, unfortunately, they had to be relayed. But it was they were absolutely machine laid, probably too well, and it ended up not falling in the right direction. But that's all been rectified, so all the water flows in the right direction now, and they've got the right steps in them. Again, another lesson in the detailing of the things we've got to think about when we do things a little bit differently.
Fantastic micro details. In terms of, is there going to be a cycling link from Waterbeach all the way to Cambridge?
Yes.
Somebody else says there is planned to be a greenway, but it's not built yet.
Yep. So again, as part of the development, and this was a pre-occupation planning requirement, if people are familiar with those planning terms. So there is the Mere Way, which is a historic Roman bridle way linking from North Cambridge up to, well, not to Waterbeach, up to Landbeach, which is a nearby village. And so one of the pre-occupation conditions was we had to improve that to create a new cycle route from Cambridge all the way up to Waterbeach, which includes a new cycle bridge over the A10. And so that's been built. The bridge hasn't been built yet because it turns out it takes absolutely ages to design a bridge right and get it through all the right stages of everything. But it is very much on track, and we should have a shiny new walking, cycling, and equestrian bridge over the A10 coming over the course of the next year. There's also then a cycle path along the A10 itself, which was already a shared path, but essentially has been upgraded, widened in places, surface improved, things like that. And also the speed on the A10 has been dropped from 40 down to 30. So the answer is yes, there are cycle links that were in place to get you from Waterbeach down to Cambridge, but it's about 6 miles. There's also then a bus service that's coming from day one, which comes to this travel hub, which can take you either into Cambridge itself or to the Waterbeach train station, and it's like a 5-minute train journey from Waterbeach to Cambridge. So yeah, absolutely, those sorts of things were in place from day one, because obviously it's critical to make sure that people are getting the behaviours right from when they're first moving in to make sure you get people properly buying in.
Well, that's really good to have those, as you say, have those things from day one. It's not always done. And it was slightly negative to have the shops not and things not in place on site, but to have the bus routes and things, that is at least the cycle routes, that's at least something. So Matt from Nottinghamshire, or not, maybe Nottingham, has got a slightly nerdy question. How has this been inspired by earlier experimental layouts, for example, span estates, or back to front layouts from the early 1970s, where front doors were oriented towards pedestrian walkways and the parking was at the back?
So I'll have to claim ignorance on this, because I,
okay, that's good. I do too.
Mere civil engineer wasn't involved in the housing layouts. There's a really good design code was put together by Fletcher Priest Architects with the master planning architect for the site, and they produced the design code, which we worked on them a lot in terms of the kind of the movement network around the site, but in terms of the actual the layouts of the homes themselves, that was all them, so I couldn't take any credit. So it is publicly available if you're interested. So do look up the Waterbeach design code and have a flick through there, and that may answer your questions.
Yeah, that'd be really useful. And how many people are on the site now? How many people are living there currently?
15 homes are currently occupied.
Okay, so very early stages.
Very early, but it's rapidly, like, it's moving pretty quick. So, considering these two parcels were just flat plains of mud 18 months ago, and we've probably got close to 100 or so, getting close to 100 homes almost completed. So it will start filling up quite rapidly, I expect.
Okay. Well, I mean, thanks very much, Wes. You actually, we should end sharing. Can you
Yeah.
come out of sharing so we can see you again? That was really terrific. I mean, I think you've been a good salesman. Probably there's a number of us who want to move over there and enjoy it. So it looks like a really good project to have been involved in as well. Yes, that's right. If you've got 1% for each house you've sold, you'll be doing well. And any other questions before we leave, Wes? No, I think we. Oh, Roxanne's got one.
I'd just like to say a really huge thank you to Wes for jumping in at the last minute.
Yes,
and I've been a bit chaotic in organising him, so that's my fault. But a huge thank you, Wes. Really, really appreciate you jumping in, and this was really fantastic. I think this YouTube recording will be shared far and wide and inspiring many other developments. So thank you for coming today and for all your amazing work on this too.
Well, no, thanks very much for asking me. And of course, it's a team effort, as with any of these things. So lots and lots of people have been involved for many years to get to where we are. I just happen to be the one holding the baton at the moment.